The 1990s was a really interesting time for sports cars, particularly Japanese ones. We had brands of all different types making their own sports cars, competing with each other, and these cars have remained well-liked and recognizable all the way until today by automotive enthusiasts. One of my favorite cars from this time period is the Toyota MR2, and today I have this beautiful example of a 1993 Toyota MR2 Turbo, and I want to show you all around it and show you the things that make it so special to me personally. The first thing I wanted to touch on the outside of this MR2 is the styling, and it is simply beautiful, and they just don't make vehicles that look like this anymore. This was a really interesting period in automotive design when brands were switching from the chiseled, boxy shapes of the 70s and 80s to this more swoopy design and sleek look of the 90s. And what I really appreciate about this car is that it doesn't have anything excessive on the exterior, no big vents or giant grille. It's simply just a beautiful, sleek design, and this one is finished in SMG, otherwise known as steel mist gray, and this color was only available on Turbo MR2s, and it's one of my favorite features about this car because something about the body lines of the MR2 with this shade of gray just make it look so clean and futuristic. One more thing while we're on the outside of this MR2 is I want to mention something really interesting the owner just told me about the dimensions of this car. If you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know that a few months ago I did a review on the C4 Corvette, and compared to this MR2 they look like completely different cars, but I've just found out that they have very similar dimensions. When it comes to the wheelbase and width of the two cars, they are both within 1 inch of each other, which is just insane to think about because when you look at these vehicles on the outside, the MR2 seems drastically smaller. Now, where the Corvette differs from the MR2 is that it has a very long hood, since obviously the big V8 is mounted up here, and the seat actually is mounted right in front of the rear wheels. So it's a totally different driving position behind the wheel of this MR2 compared to the Corvette, but it is fairly interesting to look at the dimensions and just how similar they are on paper, considering how different people might think they are. Another thing that's just really intriguing about this time period, and specifically worth mentioning about the MR2, is just how crazy these Japanese car manufacturers were at the time, and it's something you'll never see anymore. Now today, Japanese car manufacturers spend all their money developing the latest crossovers that most people will buy, but back in the 90s, each of these brands had their own unique, quirky and weird vehicle that they put out. When is the next time we're going to see Toyota invest a lot of money into putting out a mid-priced, mid-engine car? Now, I know what people are going to say, well, we have the Toyota Supra, but that's a car that they didn't put a lot of money into. They partnered with BMW for that car, and they share a lot of parts, so it's not a full investment. But this is another car that Toyota put a lot of time and resources into developing this completely unique platform, and it's something we probably won't ever see car manufacturers do again. Now, the first thing I wanted to show you guys under the hood of this MR2 is where the engine is positioned. Now, this isn't a Ferrari or anything, but back in the 90s, Toyota was feeling adventurous and decided to stuff a 3S GTE engine back here in their sports car offering. And it's just pretty cool to see an engine labeled Toyota in this position on a car. Up next, let's touch on some of the details about this 3S GTE engine, which was one of Toyota's main applications for their motorsports division for many years. And they won numerous titles across multiple different disciplines using this motor. And this motor actually features heads that were designed by Yamaha. So this isn't just your run-of-the-mill grandma's Camry. This has some serious sports engineering behind it. Now, these came from the factory making around 220 horsepower, but this one has some performance modifications that bump it up to around 260 horsepower. And having had the privilege to drive this vehicle out on the road, I can tell you that that performance is quite adequate for the size of this vehicle and makes for an awesome driving experience. Another major benefit of the mid-engine configuration that this car features is the fact that you get multiple areas for storage on the vehicle. Not only do you get a front trunk area, but you also have another large trunk mounted behind the engine here. Now, the owner was mentioning to me that this is not a true mid-engine car because vehicles like, a Ferrari or something, the body would end right behind the motor, giving it that true mid-engine look. But when you look at a Toyota MR2 from the side, you can tell that it has this little extra space here designated for a trunk to make it, a more practical and usable daily driver if you wanted to use it in that fashion. But Once you're back here, you'll notice a surprising amount of storage space, and we have some cool things in the trunk here, including this brochure from a 1991 Toyota MR2, so obviously not original to the car, but pretty cool to see that. And we have some service manuals and stuff back here, so pretty cool to see some period correct maintenance and sales information in the back of this MR2. Another thing that I really was not expecting about the Toyota MR2 is just how nicely finished the interior is. Now, when you think about a Toyota, you generally think of a relatively affordable car and something that focuses on reliability and practicality more than it does luxury features. But I have to say the interior on this one is up to par with something a little bit more expensive, like a Corvette of the time period. It's all finished with beautiful bolstered leather seats in here that are super, super comfortable, and you have, of course, all of Toyota's famous high quality finishes throughout the interior, just like a well screwed together, well put together interior that's aged really well over time. And it honestly feels better built than many cars that you can buy today. Another cool thing to see on the interior of this MR2 as someone who's owned a Toyota is just recognizing some of the parts that were borrowed directly from other Toyota products like 4Runners and Camrys. Window switches and door locks, that stuff is straight from the Toyota parts bin, as well as the turn signals and that sort of thing. I also really like this period correct Toyota stereo system, and I really respect the owner for not replacing that with some aftermarket thing. It looks very, very cool in here, very classy, and it adds to the vintage aesthetic of this interior. Another thing worth mentioning is that the shift knob in here is not stock, but I really do like the way it looks. It's pretty sleek and adds a little bit of a modern touch to the interior here. Another interesting thing in the interior are these sun visors. Now, in most modern cars, the sun visors have little warning labels on them to tell you what not to do and how not to die behind the wheel of their car. But these have a little bit of an extra high quality touch to them. Instead of just being these little cheap stick-on things, this is like a carpeted material with the warning labels like sewn into it. Another thing you'll notice on the interior of this MR2 is this giant center console here, but yet it doesn't have a storage compartment in it. So what is possibly hiding under this storage console in a mid-engine car? Because remember, all the drive components are in the rear of the vehicle. Well, what it is hiding is a 15-gallon gas tank that sits right here. It is interesting to see how Toyota thought about the packaging of this car from a design and engineering perspective and how to make it make the most sense with this unique application. But another cool performance benefit of having the gas tank here is that it centralizes the mass of the car and ensures that the handling remains consistent as you burn through the 15 gallons of fuel that are in here. Another thing specific to this car that's really worth mentioning is the fact that it has 130,000 miles on the odometer, but yet this car is in mint condition inside and out, and that's something that the owner and previous owners of this vehicle certainly deserve credit for. While they managed to get a lot of use and enjoy the hell out of this car, they've also kept up on maintenance and keeping it looking beautiful inside and out, and that's probably why it drives so well out on the road. You also get some cool period correct storage features in this car with this center cubby here that is advertised in that little brochure that I showed you guys earlier as being the perfect place to stash CDs so that you can play them when you're on a long road trip and not have to fumble around, you know, looking for where you keep them. In fact, the owner of this vehicle has some cassette tapes in here. What is this? Here we have Depeche Mode. Great choice there. Up next, I wanted to draw your attention to the front end of this vehicle, where of course you won't find an engine under this storage compartment, but instead you'll find a spare tire under here. And just like that Porsche Boxster that I reviewed a couple days ago, I was pretty impressed that Toyota found the space to incorporate a large spare tire under the hood of this. So of course it's a donut, it's not a full-size spare, but it's still pretty big and impressive that they were able to package it. But aside from that, you'll find a fuse box under here, placed to top off your brake fluid and wiper fluid. But other than that, it's just another storage space on this MR2. And while we're up here, I wanted to talk about the power steering on this car. Now, this is the first Toyota to feature electronic power steering, and unlike a Prius or a newer Toyota, it's not a fully electronic system. it basically has an electric motor that powers a hydraulic pump. So instead of it being belt driven off the motor, it's powered by that electric motor. One of the shortcomings of this is that it's controlled by an ECU, which is located right here. And on the earlier MR2s, this ECU was dialed to be pretty aggressive in its nature. So as the speeds went higher, it would lessen the degree of steering assistance that was provided, and as the speed got lower, it would increase the amount of assistance. So when you were on the track or driving aggressively and rapidly switching from going really fast, slamming on the brakes, going really slow, the computer would be too aggressive in how it altered the way that the steering felt to the driver. So the older cars are more susceptible to snap oversteer, where you can get an inconsistent feel on the steering, and it doesn't handle in as much of a predictable way as the newer ones. Now towards 93, 94, 95, Toyota kept this same overall system, but they decided to be less aggressive with how much it interfered with the steering feel. Now another thing that I wanted to touch on under the hood of this MR2 is the condition of the vehicle. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, this car has a lot of miles on it, 130,000, yet these bolts under the hood and all these components literally look like they came out of the showroom. And another really cool feature, or not feature, but thing that I found up here is this original Toyota roadside jack kit, which has all the stuff in here. Now it looks like it's been used a couple times, but it's still in really good shape, and you can see some of the original Toyota tools that this thing came with from the factory. Pretty cool to see that under here. Now, of course, being a 90s sports car, this one has the mandatory pop-up headlights, which is one of the coolest features on the MR2 and what contributes to its iconic look. But the owner was telling me something cool about these pop-up headlights is that the Japanese had figured a way to make them actually durable and long-lasting. The owner has another MR2 with 250,000 miles on it and has never had a problem with the pop-up headlights, yet you go to Corvette meetup and half of the cars are driving around like with one thing sticking up and the other one down. So if you want to get a car with pop-up headlights that are not going to break over time, this is your best bet right here. Another really cool thing that the owner pointed out to me about his MR2 that you probably won't see on any MR2s these days is that this one still has the original wiper assemblies on it, and you're probably like, what are you talking about? Most cars have the original wiper assemblies, but people in the know that MR2s have their own specific wiper part number, and it's only available through Toyota. So if you need new wipers, well, you can't just go down to AutoZone and pick them up. These actually screw onto the wiper assembly, and they have the Toyota branding on them. So they insert with these little Phillips head screws, and you'll notice that this wiper is actually curved to match the windshield shape. And then the wiper on this side has this little fairing that's built into it, and it also screws in here. So this wiper is actually one piece with a fairing on it that bolts onto this arm, and these are special order only, and most people don't enjoy the hassle of having to go through Toyota and waiting a few weeks for their wipers to arrive, so they just end up devising some other way to get aftermarket wipers to fit on their car. But pretty cool to see that featured here. So we're behind the wheel of this 93 Toyota MR2, and honestly the MR2 is really one of my favorite performance cars from this era. And this is especially special because the one that I drove previously was a non-turbo car, and honestly I was pretty impressed with the way that one drove. But it's really nice to get behind the wheel of an absolutely mint condition example of a turbo 93. One of the first things I noticed about the MR2 is actually how good the acceleration is now. The owner says this one's a little bit modified, so probably pushing, around 50 horsepower above stock, maybe. But The turbo is really responsive to input, and it spools up pretty quick. Another thing that I really like about driving this car is how, since it's a mid-engine, the turbo is right behind you, so you get a lot of good turbo noise. Not too much exhaust noise, but the turbo just sounds phenomenal, and it's not loud inside. It's very refined. Obviously, being a Toyota, you know, a lot of familiar switchgear, so it's not like one of these weird exotic cars where you can't find any of the switches. It's all this weird stuff, you know. This is a very drivable car for everyday use, and especially here in Tucson, where we're known for some of our rougher roads, this car does a pretty good job of soaking up the bumps. And just honestly, when you're driving around at part throttle, not feeling like, you know, in a spirited mood or anything, it honestly just drives like a normal 90s Corolla or Camry, and that's something that I really like about it. But another thing is, when as soon as you want to change the way you're driving and give it some gas, you get that turbo, and then also the handling is just really, really good. And I like the so I was very interested to drive this car, of course, because of the electric powered hydraulic steering, which is a very interesting concept when it was explained to me. But in practice, it actually feels really good. There's very little on-center vagueness in this car at all. Like, as soon as you turn the wheel, it goes in that direction. And what the owner was telling me about the earlier ones being a little bit more unpredictable in how much assistance they were given to the driver, it's starting to make sense to me, because in all honesty, I can't tell the difference in this car when I'm going a certain speed and how much assistance I'm getting from the electric system. So I think that's pretty cool. And of course, this one's featured with a little bit of an aftermarket transmission shifter here, so it's got pretty tight movements on the gear selector there. But yeah, it's a nice place to be. Not to mention ice cold AC, and that's another really good thing about owning. If you want to own a sports car but not an exotic brand, you should go with Toyota, because it's just like any other vehicle. As the owner was telling me, this car was engineered to the same standards as, you know, the Land Cruiser of this era, so you just know that everything is gonna last and still keep working. And same thing goes for the engine. I mean, it's just simply bulletproof. The 3S GTE, one of the best, most legendary engines Toyota ever made, and they were using that thing all the way up to the early 2000s. It just goes to show its longevity and performance attributes to be used in so many vehicles and have so many titles to its name. Another thing that I really like about driving this car is, because of the mid-engine construction, you've got that angled super low hood, which makes it kind of similar to like a Porsche 911 in terms of like driving dynamics on the track. You have beautiful visibility. I don't even see a hood in front of me unless I really get up here and try and look for it. And then another cool thing that I like, and I got a little shot of this earlier, but that curved rear windshield actually makes for some excellent visibility. And you'll see with a lot of other mid-engine cars over the years, they have all sorts of different structures and vents and louvers back there that make it almost impossible to see out the back. But in this car, with the mirror adjusted properly, it honestly feels like I'm driving a hatchback. It's pretty impressive, and you've obviously got some rather thin like window pillars up here, so I could see how this is an ideal setup for a track car, because you can just see everything and see the turns coming up ahead of you and not have big blind spots blocking exactly where you want to look and see through the corners. Let's talk about the clutch feel as well. That was one thing that kind of surprised me a little bit. This car has a clutch with a very short throw on it, and it's also pretty heavy. So if you're not really expecting that, it can kind of take some getting used to, especially you know, from a standstill start. It's kind of hard to feel out. It doesn't have much margin for error. Like, if you miss the grab point without giving it enough gas, it can get a little bit jerky. But then once you're up to speed and get used to the clutch, it's not bad, it's just different. All right, well, it's been an absolute pleasure driving this MR2 and showing it to you guys. I think this is one of the coolest cars from this time period, especially in this color with all its unique features. I'm so pleased to deliver this video to you all. So thank you so much for watching, and tune in for the next one.